Welcome to The Explainer. If you've ever wanted to really understand the deep, systemic roots of how our modern world operates, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Today, we're cracking open the historical operating systems that built two entirely different versions of human society, the East and the West. We're not just skimming the surface of historical events here. We're getting right under the hood to look at the underlying code that literally programmed our civilizations.
Okay, think about it like this. Why did two branches of humanity, who shared 99.9% of their biological DNA, mind you, build entirely different worlds? According to the source material we're analyzing today, the answer lies purely in that remaining 0.1%. We're talking about our institutional social software. Just like two identical computers can run completely different operating systems, one designed for centralized control and the other for decentralized networking, this framework suggests human societies coded completely different rules for survival, collaboration, and power.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace the sapiens' divergence, redefine civilization versus culture, and break a pretty massive historical myth. Then we'll rapid fire through 6 fundamental differences between East and West before elevating our view to find a modern baseline of freedom.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, the sapiens' divergence, and our 0.1% software. I want you to frame human history in your mind as a giant biological and social software experiment.
74,000. That is a pretty crucial number to keep in mind. Around 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted in Sumatra, and it basically plunged the Earth into a brutal volcanic winter. This environmental catastrophe brought early humans to the absolute brink of extinction, and it forced Homo sapiens to leave Africa. As they migrated, they had to adapt to entirely different geographic challenges. To survive, they had to write unique social software for collaboration. That was the exact moment the code for a divergent futures began to compile.
Moving right along to Section 2, Civilization versus Culture. We are redefining the terms.
So before we get into the historical specifics, we really need a quick paradigm shift. We have to separate two words that are often, confusingly mashed together. In this framework, the crucial point is that civilization dictates power distribution and extractive systems. Are the institutions inclusive or predatory? Does the system lead to prosperity or total collapse? According to the source, civilization can be objectively evaluated. Culture, on the other hand, is just our diverse habits. It's the food we eat, the clothes we wear, our aesthetics. There is no inherent hierarchy in culture whatsoever. It is absolutely vital we don't confuse institutional flaws, the bugs in our civilization software, so to speak, with a people's cultural DNA. When we critique a system through this lens, we are critiquing the civilization, not the culture.
Which brings us to Section 3, Breaking the Historical Myth. Let's look at the Qin system.
We really need to dismantle this popular myth of a perfectly continuous, unchanging 5,000-year Chinese history. The source material highlights a brutal rupture known as the Qin system. Before 221 BC, the Zhou dynasty actually operated on a contractual, almost feudal system, which actually somewhat resembles the early contractual spirit of the West. But in 221 BC, the analysis argues that the Qin dynasty completely smashed those aristocratic contracts. It created an all-powerful, totalizing state that stripped away local community bonds, atomizing individuals into what they literally called registered subjects who directly face state violence. And that creates a stark contrast to Western trajectories, where events like the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215 established that rules and laws sit above absolute power.
Okay, Section 4. 6 fundamental differences. Let's unpack the underlying codes of these two operating systems. The first major divergence is worldview. According to the analysis, the East was shaped by a closed geography. Think of the Yellow River Basin as a giant geographic funnel. This forged a vertical all under heaven, or Tianxia hierarchy. You've got the absolute center of power, and then these concentric circles of submission radiating outward. There are simply no equal peers. The West, however, developed around the fractured geography of the Mediterranean lake, and this forced a horizontal, cosmopolitan worldview. It created parallel, competitive sovereign states that had to figure out how to coexist through treaties and laws.
And that geography directly informs the second pillar, life view. The framework describes the East as having inner transcendence. It's portrayed as a very pragmatic, highly secular worldview where the emperor holds a divine monopoly. Because there's no external supreme spiritual judge, the authors note that secular power just remains largely unchecked. Contrast that against the Western outer transcendence. In this model, secular power, even the power of kings, was ultimately subjected to the judgment of an otherworldly god or natural law. This external focal point provided a crucial philosophical check on earthly rulers. Now, because of these differing life views, we see a massive split in values. Under the East's kin system, the analysis points out that the state actively destroyed small communities and families to ensure loyalty only flowed to the top. In this power hierarchy, individuals became mere tools. They were basically just the ink used to write the dictates of power. Conversely, Western values evolved to treat individuals as the ultimate end, not a means. The concept of rule equality emerged, meaning that laws and rules serve as armor. They protect the individual from the arbitrary whims of absolute authority.
Next up, the authors contrast their mindsets. They argue the Eastern associative mindset, built on yin-yang and the 5 elements, is fantastic for holistic philosophy and art. It's beautiful. But because it connects everything to everything else, it lacks falsifiability. They suggest it can actually trap a society in untestable mysticism. On the other hand, the West developed Aristotelian rational logic. This rigorous, deductive framework breaks things down into testable parts, which the source identifies as absolutely necessary for the birth of the scientific revolution.
Difference number 5 is all about the profound impact of language. Chinese characters are visual, right? This means a decree from the emperor could be read and understood across a vast empire, regardless of the hundreds of completely different spoken dialects. It was the ultimate administrative protocol for unification. Meanwhile, phonetic alphabets are auditory. So when the Gutenberg press started printing books in local phonetic languages, it naturally fractured Europe into distinct, localized identities and, eventually, separate nation-states.
Ultimately, these 5 factors culminate in a final difference: historical rhythm. The analysis describes the Eastern trajectory as the tragedy of the dynastic cycle. Absolute power inevitably leads to administrative entropy, where the bureaucracy essentially rots from the inside out. This results in total societal collapse, catastrophic population loss, and a bloody reset. The Western model, particularly after institutions like parliaments were formed, relies on steady reform. It's a system of incremental patches, debates, and legal updates that course corrects without requiring a catastrophic reset of the entire civilization.
This brings us to Section 5, elevating our historical view, finding the sacred truth. As we zoom out and look at these 2 vast, divergent systems, we really should impartially consider Lord Acton's famous principle: comment is free, but facts are sacred. History shouldn't just be this sweeping, romanticized narrative of emperors, grand conquests, and absolute power. It absolutely must be a brutally honest record of the ordinary person's life and, all too often, their immense suffering under these inescapable systems. We must look at the facts of the human cost.
Finally, Section 6, the baseline of freedom. How do we actually patch the system?
Well, the source outlines 3 critical patches to basically upgrade our civilization software today. First up, historical honesty. We have to openly acknowledge the true human costs of predatory institutions without romanticizing the past. Second, legal dignity. We have to ensure the absolute authority of the law sits above any form of absolute power or violence. Rules really must be our armor. And finally, rational evolution. We must commit to logical, common-sense problem-solving, rather than falling back on mysticism or unchecked authority.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. We are all descendants of those early sapiens just navigating the software our ancestors wrote. In the grand river of history, amidst all these differing systems of power and culture, how do we find and protect the shared baseline of human freedom? Think about the institutions around you. Are they built on unchecked power, or are they built on protective rules? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.